Hey guys, it's me, Base Libertarian, and I'm gonna make a video called We Need Lower Taxes. So a while ago I made a video about why we need lower taxes, and this video I think was poorly made, it wasn't edited, and I spoke too slowly and the video was really boring because I just felt confused a lot of the time. And so I'm gonna be remaking this video, and I'll delete that video I made earlier. And also I think the video was kind of cringe, so I'm gonna just delete that. But before I start, please watch a video I made on Brexit, on why it's good for the economy. And basically, I have a spreadsheet, right? And the spreadsheet says that even if we have lower income, because hard Brexit like destroys trade, which it probably wouldn't, we would have significantly more disposable income despite that, because house prices will plummet, because, you know, there's less foreign capital and there is less immigration. And by the way, I live in the city of London. I'm looking to move into Canary Wharf, which, by the way, has like only, you know, a black population of 1% compared to Elephant and Castle, where I live in, which is infested with certain groups of people. And in Canary Wharf, you can live in a really nice place for the same income, and it's significantly higher quality, which is amazing. Anywho, let's start on with this. So typically a higher deficit means that there's higher GDP growth. This is a big graph, which looks complicated, but it's not, it's simple. The red line is a deficit. When the red line goes down, the deficit increases. And the blue line is GDP growth. And typically the lines are symmetrical, so when the deficit increases, GDP growth increases. In the 1950s, there is a surplus, GDP growth is low. In the 1960s, there is a constant deficit and GDP growth is high. In the 1970s and the 80s, the deficit increases and GDP growth increases. In the 1990s, this isn't true because the economy is running on private sector debt, which leads to the dot-com bubble crash. And of course, private sector debt is quite unsustainable for the economy to run on. Okay. Now, on a micro level, I earn around 40k a year, I pay 25% effective tax. So if I work for 12 months in a year, which I do, I spend 3 months working for the government. If I had more money, because I had lower taxes, and if you had a big tax cut, which is good of course, you would have more money to spend on goods and services like wine, alcohol, cars, housing, computers, whatever, and the economy would do better because the businessmen will have more income and they can spend more money. And also, government expenditure tends to be very wasteful, as I'll prove right here. So government services are bad, and all of them are bad, and I live in the UK and we're going to dissect what the government in Britain spends money on and why it's bad. Social protection is £300 billion a year. Divide that by 60 million people, you would expect every citizen to be paid £5,000 a year, except I don't get paid that money, you don't get paid that money, something is wrong. Now, 100 billion gets paid to pensioners every year. And you think, okay, well, pensioners have to be paid money, but the problem is that there are 8.5 million pensioners in this country. Each pensioner gets paid £9,620 a year. 9,600 times 8.5 million is 82 billion. 82 billion pounds is a lot less than the allocated budget of 100 billion pounds. So why is there a 20% inefficiency? You may think it's because workers are paid too little. However, in the DWP, there is 96,000 workers. Each worker gets paid on average £33,000. Multiply those two numbers together and you get 3,168,000,000. That number is 1% of the total budget for social protection. The problem isn't that these bureaucrats are paid too little, but rather, no, not too much, but actually too little. Because the highest salary in the DWP is £37,000 a year, this means that somebody who has a lot of skills would rather go to the private sector where they can get paid higher wages rather than the low-paid public sector. This means that the public sector, like the Department of Work and Pensions, is filled with a bunch of incompetent idiots who are not worthy of earning at least 40k a year. Healthcare. The NHS is bureaucratic and awful. everybody in the country says so. And COVID has exacerbated the systemic problems in the NHS, where all of the bureaucrats and the administrators at the top, who are managerials, they do not care about what happens to the people who they are supposed to serve, because they are not incentivized to. And also they are just interested in keeping up with their targets and doing as little as possible to keep their jobs. Because of COVID, the NHS budget has gone up and up, yet hundreds of thousands of long-term appointments have been cancelled. In other words, more money has gone into the NHS, despite them doing less and less. This is bad. This is not good. What about defence? Spending money on defence is not good, because Russia is not a threat to the United Kingdom. This is because Russia is currently denazifying Ukraine, and Nazis are bad. Also, Russia is taking on the globalist elite in Davos, which is why they are invading Ukraine, which is a proxy state for the international gangsters. This is why I support Russia. And just as a quick remark, even though I'm a free market capitalist and I oppose state capitalism, I actually think that, ironically, Russia's state capitalist economy will actually do much better than Western economies. That's not to say state capitalism is good, because I think China does have a big debt problem in the private sector, and yeah, the entire world, whether it's the East and the West, will suffer a major financial collapse because of private sector debt. Yeah, now another thing, let's look at studies on if there were to be a middle class tax cut. Now, on the internet, I actually found it really difficult to find studies that analysed potential middle class tax cuts and the effects that middle class tax cuts would have on the economy. All I could find was a study from an article featured in Knowledge at Wharton, and it basically examined that what if the 22% middle class tax bracket was reduced down to 15%, and what it found was that there would be a 0.4 increase in GDP growth. Now, if you look at the last 10 years, we would see that the average GDP growth is 2% year on year, and so if 2% goes to 2.4%, that's basically a 20% increase, which is pretty large. And this is just a partial tax cut, and I believe in a complete abolishment of taxes. I think people like me should have more money to spend on goods and services, and more money to potentially invest in businesses and invest in ourselves and whatever. Now, I want to talk about why there isn't much discussion on middle class tax cuts, and the reason is that whenever you get a Republican or Conservative Party president in government, president, prime minister, whoever, what happens is that you get tax cuts which are mostly aimed at the upper class. Now, it is true that the upper class get taxed the most, therefore they receive the most tax cuts. I agree with this. And it is also true that the rich do actually pay their fair share. When Ben Shapiro made that video debunking the rich don't pay their fair share, I mean, of course, I agree with everything Ben Shapiro says, and his video is actually quite good, but I disagree with the fact of giving tax cuts to the rich, because they don't need the money compared to the middle class. Because the middle class are people who just want to get by, and they need money, and of course the middle class are just as capable as the rich of starting their own businesses and investing, and also the lower class, and of course the lower class, they're paying taxes when they can barely get by, which is disgraceful, obviously. And if you look at the Trump presidency, there is a graph I want to show you, and it looks at tax cuts. It looks at the Trump tax cuts, and it looks at how tax cuts changed from 2016 to 2022. And what we see here is that if you add up all of the percentages of the tax cuts, you get a total of 13.6%. And that means that the super rich tax cuts, you know, the upper tax bracket of 2.6%, that is a total tax cut of 20%. 2.6 over 13.6 is 20%. However, when you add up the upper middle class tax brackets, what you see is that actually 50% of the Trump tax cuts went towards the upper middle class and the super rich, rather than the actual middle class, which I find is quite disappointing because it goes to show that Trump is a corporatist. And it would be great if Trump was actually like a libertarian and whatever, but yeah, again, Trump's the kind of person who has Steve Mnuchin, out of all people, in his cabinet as the Treasury Secretary, which goes to show that corporatism exists in the Republican Party, and the Republican Party are globalists, unfortunately. Okay, now to go back to what the government was spending our taxpayer money on, we covered defence, that's £60 billion a year, which is all a waste. Education is £124 billion a year, which is wasteful because young people are not being equipped with technical skills. Transport is £51 billion a year, which is useful when it comes to public transport, but a lot of infrastructure spending, like building roads, is very bad for the environment and for the economy, because people have no choice but to drive cars that are very costly to own and buy car insurance. And statistically speaking, cities with better public transport tend to have more happiness on the subjective happiness indexes. Healthcare is £230 billion a year, which, of course, that's the NHS, which I said it was a crap system, which it is. Social protection, £300 billion, that's bad and inefficient. If we had no taxes, we wouldn't need social protection. We could just put our hard-earned money into stocks, and we would be much, much wealthier. Industry, agriculture and employment, £70 billion. These are Keynesian government programs which overfeed the bad parts of the private sector, and when it comes to things like agriculture, much like in the New Deal, farmers get paid to underproduce food or even retire altogether. This isn't a joke, it really exists. Housing and environment, £33 billion. Now, a lot of that is just to do with building council homes and spending money on basically housing people into poor accommodation, which is unsustainable because those accommodations are very bad quality with bad infrastructure that decline to a point where they have to be abolished. I think it was Scrump Monkey along with Evelyn, they did a really good stream on this, very informative, basically about how the public sector is involved in some sort of sinister scheme with rich landlords to waste taxpayer money on housing. And then there's things like, debt interest, 45 billion, public order and safety, 41 billion, that's all fine. But yeah, in total, this video is about why we need lower taxes. First, the economy is better if we are not taxed at all, so then we have more financial freedom. And second of all, the way that our tax money is being spent is not very good for society, as I've just covered. And yeah, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Leave a like, smash that comment and subscribe, okay?